Hi, welcome to Heather Helton's presentation of the Global Business Plan and Management 541. Please open the PowerPoint attachment that I've submitted so that you can follow along. On the first page, you'll see that there is a picture of the human kidneys. That's because I'm going to be talking to you about a product that treats chronic kidney disease, also known as CKD. On the second slide, you'll see the table of contents, which explains all the content that will be presented today. On the third slide, I'll give you a background of the product. So the kidney dialysis chip was created by scientists at Fresenius Medical Care to provide a solution for patients that are currently going through chronic kidney disease. The kidney dialysis chip is inserted into the patient's body and performs dialysis so that waste, salt, and extra water are removed from the body, but the patient does not have to be sitting down connected to a dialysis machine in order for dialysis to occur. On the next slide, you'll see a picture of a typical dialysis machine. So there's no longer a need for these machines because Fresenius Medical Care now has a chip that can be inserted into the patient's body to perform dialysis. The next slide explains an overview of the product. CKD ranks as the 8th leading cause of death in women across the world, which is around 600,000 deaths a year. And Fresenius Medical Care is expanding globally so that the company can make this kidney dialysis chip available to patients around the world that have CKD. So Fresenius Medical Care is planning to open a manufacturing facility in Bahir Dar, Ethiopia. On the next slide, you'll see health conditions and life expectancy have been improving in Africa, but there's still a prevalence of 15.8% within the adult population living on the African continent. And a total of 4.6 adults living in Africa already have been identified as having moderate or severe decreases in kidney function. Simultaneously, Ethiopia's manufacturing industry is growing, which you can see on slide number 7. Ethiopia has abundant cheap labor, no tariffs, and a stable political environment, which is attractive for investors. The Ethiopian government also commissioned 6 new industrial parks to be opened up so that foreign investors can establish their manufacturing operations in Ethiopia. The labor costs per worker are about $909, which is comparable with the labor cost in other nations that also have booming manufacturing industries like Bangladesh. The next slide goes over the FDI attractiveness of Ethiopia. So Ethiopia has a growing and youthful population, an emerging middle class, accelerating urban development, expanding agricultural sector, untapped mineral wealth, and there's a forecast for strong, sustained economic growth for Ethiopia's future. On the next page, I wrote that abundant natural resources, the increasing standard of living, and the growing frequency of higher education levels among the population make Ethiopia a relatively attractive place for FDI. The next slide goes over political and economic risks associated with establishing a business in Ethiopia. For political risks, the private investments are still limited in the economy because it's primarily controlled by the state. But the Prime Minister is actually implementing reforms that are going to be beneficial for private investors. Exacerbated ethnic tensions still exist among groups in Ethiopia, so that can contribute to social unrest and be a political risk. For economic risks, there is a difficult business environment and debt collection is unpredictable in Ethiopia. There's also high inflation at 11.1%, and there's food shortages due to the delay of long rain season. The next slide goes over legal and cultural risks. There is an insufficient level of foreign exchange reserves as well as very weak safeguards for protecting against contract violations. So that's not good for trading partners because contracts can be broken and then no one is going to do anything about it because there's such weak protections for that. The cultural risks. So Ethiopia is a collectivist society, so that means the employee demeanor is going to be a lot different in Ethiopia than what we're used to seeing in Western nations. The next slide goes over the preliminary business plan. Fresenius Medical Care is going to use the global standardization strategy for the kidney microchip, and they're going to establish a wholly owned subsidiary in Bahir Dar, Ethiopia for producing the product. The next slide goes over social and cultural considerations. So Ethiopia has a caste system, and many people that are in castes believe that their caste determines their occupation. That means not a lot of Ethiopians may be interested in working for an American company because they believe the caste has already determined what kind of job they're supposed to have. The next slide says that we are going to have to promote the employment opportunities to people that are in the top level castes within Ethiopia, because the people that are in the top level castes are the ones that can decide the occupation for themselves. The next slide mentions the literacy rate. So for men, it's 49.13%, and women are at 28.92%, which means that the manufacturing facilities are probably going to hire more men than women since literacy is a requirement. The next slide explains power distance. So Ethiopians have a strong belief in power distance, which means that they accept a hierarchical order in society. And that's a good thing, because once they realize what their jobs are and they're aware of who they report to and they understand their responsibility, there's going to be very few problems with authority in the workplace, because power distance influences their beliefs about work and life. The next slide goes over the strategy. So Fresenius Medical Care is going to use the global standardization strategy for the kidney dialysis chip because the firm wants to pursue a low-cost strategy on a global scale. Fresenius Medical Care is going to reap the cost reductions that come from economies of scale, learning effects, and location economies. The next slide explains that economies of scale result from reducing the unit cost of a product by producing a large quantity of that product. So Fresenius Medical Care will achieve economies of scale by spreading their fixed costs over a large volume and maximizing sales of the kidney dialysis chip. The next slide explains that learning effects will occur when laborers train one another how to carry out a specific task in the production process. So that means the current manufacturers that are working in the United States are going to go over to Ethiopia and train those manufacturing workers on how the production process works. Same thing for the managers. The plant managers here in the United States will go over to Ethiopia and train the plant managers on how to effectively manage the plant. The next slide says, where is the kidney dialysis chip produced and sold? It's going to be produced and sold in Bahir Dar, Ethiopia, and it's going to be sold to networks of doctors across Ethiopia in order for CKD patients to have access to the treatment all around the country. This means Fresenius Medical Care is going to engage in contracts with different groups of doctors so that each one can have the appropriate number of dialysis chips. The next slide says, why will kidney dialysis chip be successful? So there are 10% of the worldwide population affected by CKD. And because dialysis is a time-consuming process in which patients cannot walk around or move vigorously, we believe the kidney dialysis chip will be the preferred alternative to traditional dialysis treatment. The next slide says the kidney dialysis chip offers a better quality of life for patients due to the ability to move and walk around normally after the chip has been inserted into their body. And this is a huge selling point for the product. We believe the doctors who treat patients with CKD will see this product as a way better option for treatment because it drastically improves the quality of life of patients. We will sell the product globally so that patients everywhere can utilize this treatment. The next slide goes over the final business plan. So the globalization entry mode is to establish a wholly owned subsidiary in Bahir Dar, Ethiopia. The next slide says the reason that we want to use a wholly owned subsidiary is because Fresenius Medical Care wants to maintain the technological know-how and intellectual property of the design of the kidney dialysis chip. The firm intends to absorb all the profits from the sale of this product and doesn't want to share the profits with any other firms. So the only way to keep all those profits and maintain the technological know-how of the design of the chip is to have a wholly owned subsidiary. Fresenius Medical Care will acquire an existing firm where patients are already being treated for CKD, as you can see on slide 25. The firm has to acquire treatment centers that are already affiliated with patients and networks of doctors in order to bring attention to this new CKD treatment, because Fresenius Medical Care is not a well-known company within Ethiopia. It's well-known in the United States, but the client base and the patient base already exist in Ethiopia at current treatment centers where people are receiving dialysis. So those are the centers that we need to acquire. The costs associated with establishing a greenfield venture are too enormous for Fresenius Medical Care to take on, since there are already established treatment centers with patients and with doctors that are treating CKD. The next slide, 26, says that there's an 82.6 labor force participation rate in Ethiopia, which is fairly high. It counts the number of people who are either employed or actively looking for work. The unemployment rate is 16.8%, which is rather high. That means that Fresenius Medical Care will have the power in determining wages for employees. Anytime that there's a high unemployment rate, that means the employer has the power in determining the wages. So around slightly more than 3 out of 4 working age adults are employed in Ethiopia. On slide 27, the average monthly cost of manufacturing in Ethiopia is between $80 and $100. Ethiopia benefits generally low costs because the general level of prices in Ethiopia is below the level in other countries. Their labor costs average slightly more than $1 per day and is reasonable compared to other African countries. The next slide says that education rates in Ethiopia have been increasing dramatically. The workforce is becoming more educated each year, which means Fresenius Medical Care will be able to find Ethiopian employees that are equipped with the appropriate knowledge and language skills to work in the manufacturing facility. The next slide goes over the human resources approach that Fresenius is going to take, which is the geocentric staffing policy. The benefit of a geocentric staffing policy is that the firm maintains a group of international executives that are able to work in several countries and adapt to multiple cultures, which allows for a strong, unifying corporate culture. On the next slide, you'll see that Fresenius Medical Care has a global standardization strategy for the kidney dialysis product, and that needs to be supported by a geocentric staffing policy. The reason for that is because on slide 32, a geocentric staffing policy allows for core competencies to be transferred in multiple directions, enabling the firm to get the best value that it possibly can from the pursuit of experience curve and location economies. A geocentric staffing policy also results in the multinational composition of the management team, and that reduces cultural myopia and allows each office to be very responsive to local needs. For my summary of the business plan on slide 32, I wanted to point out that there is prevalence of 15.8% for CKD, stages 1 through 5, in the general population of adults living in Africa. And the manufacturing industry in Ethiopia is growing, and there's an abundant amount of cheap labor, no tariffs, and a stable political environment, which is attractive for foreign investors. The unemployment rate is 16.8%, which means that the companies are going to have the power in determining wages. And due to an increase in the workforce's education each year, there will be more and more workers that are equipped to work in the manufacturing sector. On slide 33, I pointed out that establishing a wholly owned subsidiary is the best approach for Fresenius Medical Care because the company wants to maintain the technological know-how of designing and producing the kidney dialysis chip. And Fresenius Medical Care will acquire CKD treatment centers that already exist within Ethiopia instead of establishing a greenfield venture. When patients arrive at those treatment centers that are soon to be acquired by Fresenius Medical Care, they will learn about this new opportunity to receive dialysis, and they'll be so excited about it because it's going to improve their quality of life drastically. On slide 34, I pointed out that patients can be mobile while dialysis is taking place as long as they have the kidney dialysis chip. And there's no other product that allows for such an improvement in the quality of life for patients with CKD. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation, and I look forward to listening to all of yours and getting to hear about the awesome products that you came up with. Have a great rest of your evening, everyone. Bye-bye.